Empty to the Jeep, and I'm here with the
Chef Rosanna.
and we're back with another Mr. Ballen reaction. So we actually messed up, and we found out we were watching the wrong series, and we decided to watch a series that was more suited for
Well,
us.
I will not say wrong because it was pretty much the same thing.
Right.
A little,
Spelled a little
different way.
Right.
But was still like places that you're supposed to don't go, but people went anyway.
Right.
It was more like they're supposed to don't be there. It was more like
Part of the missing 411.
yeah.
So we decided to go watch the 5 strangest disappearances in forests, missing 401. So this is gonna be the part 1, and we decided to jump on this playlist. So without wasting time,
Let's go.
Strange seems to be going on inside of national parks in North America. Every year, hundreds of people go missing in these parks. But these parks are huge expanses of wilderness, so it's not particularly unusual that people might go missing inside of them. But every year, of those hundreds of people that go missing, there's always a few that go missing under very strange circumstances. Either the way in which they disappeared doesn't really add up. You know, someone will be watching or keeping an eye on someone. They'll turn around and then turn back, and that person's missing, and there's not a trace of them, and they're never found again. Or you'll have instances of someone will go missing, there'll be an extensive search, there's no trace of them, and then they're found like miles and miles away in locations that are almost impossible to get to. Now, one man, David Paulides, who's a former police detective, he began researching these very strange disappearances inside of national parks. It started when a park ranger actually approached him and said, hey, there's a bunch of weird things happening in state parks. You should look into it because you're a former detective. And so after looking into it, he discovered that there were so many oddities around many of these strange disappearances. And he saw there was many overlaps and similarities that he really dove into it. And he's examined thousands of these strange cases. By his count, 10,000 plus hours of research. He's written 4 books. They're all under the name Missing 411. If you Google Missing 411, you'll find a plethora of information about these cases.
Okay.
He has 2 documentaries
Interesting.
out. And so David, while he doesn't actually take a stance as to, what's causing these strange disappearances, anybody that follows along with the Missing 411 cases is basically led to believe that something is hunting humans in North America inside of national parks. It is fascinating, it is terrifying, and I've picked out 5 of the most bizarre cases that I've come across inside of Missing 411. Before we get into those 5 stories, though, if this is the type of content that you're interested in, these strange, dark, mysterious that
Absolutely.
I promised in this video, well, that's what my channel is all about. And I post 3 to 4 times a week.
So do we.
If that's your style and you like that type of content, if you could, please gently lambast the like button and then please turn on all notifications.
Please do to us
so you don't
too.
miss any of my weekly uploads. All right, let's get into the stories.
let's go. Wow, this was definitely
On
a while
Father's Day
back.
weekend, 1969, 6-year-old Dennis Martin, his brother, his father, and his grandfather headed up to the Smoky Mountains to go camping.
Beautiful.
This was a family tradition on Father's Day, and they were really excited about it. They get to the same campsite they always used. They set up. They have a wonderful first night. They camp out, and the next day, another camper in the area happened to walk by and saw that Dennis and his brother were playing there. And so this camper had kids as well, and he asked Dennis's father, hey, would it be okay if I brought my kids by? They're the same age as your sons, and they can just play together. Dennis's father says, sure, bring them down. And so the man goes, gets his kids, they come back, and before long, all the kids are playing hide and seek. Now, Dennis's father
Don't do
would
that
say
in a
he
forest.
had an eye on Dennis the whole time. He was just at a distance, but watching his son to make sure he didn't get lost. And so at one point, all the kids are hiding from the parents. And, at some point, the parents say, okay, show yourselves. And all the kids, except for Dennis, show themselves. And Dennis's father has watched Dennis go behind a particular tree. He watched him do it. He was watching the whole time. And so when they said, come on out, and he didn't come out, he actually wasn't that concerned because he knew exactly where his son was. And then after a few moments, he yelled to his son directly and starts walking over and says, Dennis, come out, Dennis. I know you're behind the tree. And when he finally got over there, Dennis wasn't there. Dennis's father immediately starts running off into the woods, screaming for his son. And he actually ends up running almost 2 miles.
Wow.
Up
Wow,
the
that's a lot.
trail, just hollering for his son, and he can't find him. And then the rest of the family had broken up and was searching the area because they're thinking like,
How far
he couldn't have gone very far. He was
Yeah.
literally just here. And Dennis's father had said before, like, I watched him go behind the tree. I watched him. I don't know where he is, but I watched him go behind the tree.
Right.
And so they're searching everywhere, and Dennis is gone. So a huge search. In fact, the biggest search in park history ensues with 1,500 searchers.
Oh, wow.
That included the Army Green Berets, so the
Oh,
Special
wow.
Forces got involved. They are combing a 60 square mile plot. They're looking everywhere, and there is nothing. There's no trace. There's no scent. There is nothing connected to Dennis Martin anywhere. And so they go back to Dennis's father, and they're like, you have to tell us what you saw. Again, this doesn't add up. If you were looking at the tree, and he was right there, how is it that he has just vanished into thin air? But no one knew. That was it. No one knows what happened. There's no closure. He's just gone, and they never knew what happened to him. Years later, when David Paulides was doing his research for Missing 411 and was researching the Dennis Martin case, he interviewed other families that had been at the campground at the same time that Dennis had gone missing. And one of those families was the Key family. And they had asked a park ranger where they could go on the campground where they might be able to see some bears. And so the park ranger obviously said, be careful, but you can go over here to this section of the campground, and you might see a bear. And so they head over there, and they're looking for bears. And one of their children hears a scream, or thinks he hears a scream, and kind of directs the family to look in the direction of the scream. And from their vantage point, they could see up onto the side of this mountain where there was, call it sparse trees all over the mountain, so you could kind of see in between the trees. And they saw what looked like a bear running along the mountainside, but with something slung over its shoulder. Except the interesting thing about this bear was the father was quoted as saying that it didn't really act like a bear. It was acting more like a human the way it was running. It looked, hairy and like an animal, but it was running and dodging between trees. It was holding this, what looked like a child over its shoulder. It acted almost like a human. And so you have a bear man that has been spotted by the Key family, and they bring this up to the investigators that are looking into the Dennis Martin case. And obviously the Dennis Martin investigators, they don't take this seriously. They think that they're just saying some ridiculous thing for attention or whatever it is. So it never really was entered into the case with Dennis Martin. It wasn't until the Missing 411 cases that it was ever connected. But there really was a family that claims to have seen a bear man carrying a child about an hour after Dennis Martin had gone missing in the same area where Dennis Martin had gone missing.
That's crazy.
Yeah, but how is possible, even if it was like a bear or something like that, grabbing the child, how the father didn't saw that behind the tree?
We don't know.
How you didn't hear it as well?
We don't know how the bear man's powers work.
That's true. That's true. That's true.
We just know that he had the baby in his arm and the baby gone.
Probably. We don't know if even existing.
Yeah.
But
in the spring of 1952, 2-year-old Keith Parkins was playing with his siblings outside of his grandfather's ranch in Ritter, Oregon. And when the kids were all called in to have lunch, Keith was nowhere to be found. And so the siblings and the family went out and did a cursory search looking for Keith. And when nothing turns up, they call in authorities, and a full-fledged search is launched for Keith. There's no sign, there's nothing. And 4 miles away from the ranch, they find, several hours later, some footprints that look like they might belong to a 2-year-old. And they start tracking those footprints, and they go on for miles and miles, and the man's kind of stuck. And it wouldn't be until the next day, 12 miles away from the ranch, that they would ultimately find Keith. Surprisingly, Keith, who had disappeared with not enough clothing to be out in sub-zero temperatures with snow on the ground, and being 2 years old, he wasn't prepared for a night out. He was found alive, face down, 12 miles away. His jacket and his hat had been stacked neatly next to him, and he had scratch marks all over his face, but he was unhurt. When asked, what happened, he was 2 years old, he had said a cat scratched him, and he kept repeating that a cat had scratched him. That was the only thing that he could articulate. No one knew how a 2-year-old, in the span of 20 hours could have moved in the middle of the night 12 miles away. Les Stroud, who's a very accomplished outdoorsman, he's the star, he is Survivor Man. He actually, because of this case, went out and tried to actually cover the distance in the allotted time. You have 20 hours to cover this 12 miles. And he couldn't do it. And he even said, like, it's not possible for a 2-year-old to have covered this distance, let alone survived the exposure to the elements and the time that he was out there. But somehow he did. And, you know, years and years later, Keith was interviewed, because now he's a grown man, he was interviewed about what happened, and he has no idea. He has no memory of it.
I mean, it was 2 years old, so
At the
it's
end
too
of
young.
1973, 19-year-old Charles McCuller, who was an amateur photographer, had been doing a West Coast tour of the United States, going to all the different national parks to photograph beautiful scenery. And by January of 1974, he was in Oregon and wanted to go to Crater Lake, where he wanted to take pictures of Crater Lake.
That's
So
nice.
he asked his friend,
Not
who
the
had
real
an
lake.
alternate vehicle, to take him out to Crater Lake, because his van, which was this VW beat-up old van, it couldn't have made it out that far. And as his friend is driving him out to Crater Lake, Charles says to him, kind of jokingly, yeah, if you don't hear from me in a couple of days, file a missing person report. Sure enough, a couple days later, when Charles doesn't show up, that friend does
This is
file a
crazy.
missing person report.
Don't do-
And an extensive search is conducted at Crater Lake to find Charles. There's no sign of Charles. There's nothing. There's no anything about Charles. And his father actually flew out there and stayed for several months, just constantly searching the area. Found nothing. So nothing is found. So a year later, a couple of backpackers were hiking the area around Crater Lake, and they get lost. They take a wrong turn, and they're well off the trailhead, and they discover a backpack. In the backpack, they found a strange-looking Volkswagen key that anyone that knew Charles McCuller knew that he had this strange key. And so when they found it, it was a distinctive key. And so when they gave it to police, it turned out that it was Charles McCuller's backpack. So investigators went out and started looking in the area that this backpack was found, which was 12 miles off the trailheads. This is well off the trailhead. And near the backpack, they find what remained of Charles McCuller. So they found his pants unbuttoned and on a log, as if he was sitting on the log and then just disappeared into the ground. But his pants were still there. Sticking out of the pants were his socks, no shoes, and in the socks were his feet bones. There was no jacket, there was no upper portion of his skeleton. 12 feet away, they find a portion of his skull. And that is the last thing they find of Charles McCuller. And ultimately, it was determined that he died of natural causes. His family was not prepared to accept that, however, when you look at some of the circumstances. We have, he's missing his jacket, he's missing his boots, he's missing his photography equipment, his head is detached from his body. He was also 12 miles off the trailhead. And when he went missing, there had been approximately 5 to 7 feet of snow that had dumped in the area. So how did he move 12 miles off the trailhead in 7 feet of snow?
Right.
Especially
7 feet of snow, damn.
he was
That's
not
a lot.
an outdoorsy type. And even when he got dropped off by his friend that drove him out there, he even said later on that he felt like Charles was very ill-equipped for the environment he was going into. But at the end of the day, it was left as, sorry, he went missing and he died of natural causes. And that was that.
I don't like that.
I mean, that's a easy excuse to say, when you don't have nothing to say, when you...
Yeah, they always try to say, like...
There is more question.
Yeah, they always try to say, like... They always try to close the case really quickly. I think a lot of the people know what's going on. Don't know, but they know that something mysterious is going on. They try to close the case because they can't stop something. But, let's get this one.
Or maybe somebody just tried to cover something.
Yeah, definitely.
That's the easiest way, just say that, and you cannot complain about it.
Right.
Especially if he's a doctor writing down on the
autopsy and everything. Yep.
And plus, there is even nothing to check into much. It was just like a piece of skeleton, so...
Right. They didn't even say if the skeleton was clean or anything like that. They said they found a piece of it. I'm like, how long?
Yeah.
This is crazy. Oh, well. Bart Schleyer.
Bart Schleyer was
Schleyer,
a famous outdoorsman and hunter. He was just one of those people that you could drop into any environment, and he's not only going to survive, he's going to thrive. A testament to that would be he spent months in Siberia tracking and catching Siberian tigers. He was like a world-renowned tiger tracker.
Wow.
Super rugged, super competent outdoorsman. In September of 2004, Bart books a float plane to take him 175 miles north into the Yukon territory in Canada for him to go hunt moose on his own for 3 weeks. He had all the right equipment. He was obviously extremely capable, and no one thought twice about it. When he got dropped off, he told the pilot, "Meet me back here in 3
ain't no
weeks."
tiger. It's a moose.
So off he went. The plane
Yeah.
and comes back 3 weeks later, and there's no Bart. Now, the pilot knew Bart was like a god in the wilderness, and so he wasn't really concerned, but, he went over to where he had been told his campsite would be, and he found the campsite. And it looked like someone was still living there. It didn't look like it had been destroyed at all. And then near his campsite, he found a dry bag, which looked like it had an indent on it, where someone might have been sitting on it up against a tree. And then next to the tree was his bow and some arrows. And it looked like an area where a hunter might have been sitting to call in moose, but there was no Bart. Near the dry bag and the bow and arrow, they found Bart's teeth and a couple of shards of bone. Initially, the thought is, well, a large predator must have snuck up on Bart and eaten him.
Yeah.
Except there's a couple of huge problems with that theory. One, Bart, his friends at least would say, and people that knew him would say, he would never get snuck up on by a large predator. He was so accomplished in the wilderness.
Right.
Like, he was always a step ahead of everything around him. So the idea that
Tracking
he was
tigers.
sitting there one day,
Yeah.
a bear would just happen to sneak up on him.
Get the drop
pretty
on him.
far-fetched.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Also, in the area where his teeth and some of his bones were found, there was no sign of what they call a death struggle, where you're fighting for your life.
Animal,
You're
yeah.
everything.
Yeah.
There's none of that. There's no marking on the ground or in the surrounding areas that a large predator had attacked him.
Right.
Also, his camp had food out in the open, and if a large predator had come through, like a
We
bear,
got a food too.
after it finished with Bart, it would have raided the campsite, and it didn't. And so the way this was left was he was attacked and eaten by a predator. But nobody believes that because that wouldn't happen to Bart, and the circumstances around his campsite didn't really add up.
I agree. That was weird.
Right? Yeah, I don't think Bart was out there getting snuck up on. Like,
That was something else there.
They're covering that up.
And plus, he had harrow. He had everything. Like,
He had food, he had everything was good.
and plus, if, as you say, if it was a predator there, any kind of predator, even after, okay, it didn't supposed to be the same, but even after, it was like food open.
Yeah, they would have came back and ravaged the camp and everything. That's so true.
Like even a bear with baby bear or another bear, like, the same bear will come later on, and he knows there is food there.
Right, exactly. Makes sense. For sure.
Weird.
Christopher Tompkins, story 5. Bam.
In 2002, Christopher Tompkins was working.
My bad, y'all. Tell us what you think about that. What do you think happened to Buddy in the because I don't make any sense. How you come back and all of a sudden all his teeth are there and piece of bone. That's crazy.
Yeah.
Let's know what you guys think about it.
As a surveyor, and he was assigned to this 4-man survey crew that was working in Harris County, Georgia. And they were walking along this road spaced about 50 feet apart, all 4 of them. And Chris was the last one in line. And the third one in line would later tell investigators and police that as they were walking along the road, he would periodically turn around to just, for a quick second, make sure Chris was still there. And as they're walking along with no sound or any indication that anything's happened, he turned around, saw Chris, kept walking. A few minutes later, turned around, and Chris is gone.
What?
The third guy hails the other 2, and they go, and they're like, where did Chris go? They're looking down the road, like maybe he stopped, maybe
Yeah.
he
Tied his
stepped off
shoes,
the
went to
trail,
go to the bathroom.
but they can't see him, and they go back they start walking down the road towards where he would have been, and they find on the ground a pile of loose change and some of his tools that would have been in his pockets. And then they see one of his boots stuck in the barbed wire, because there was a little barbed wire fence that was running the length of this road.
Weird.
One of his boots was stuck in the barbed wire, and there was nothing else. They searched the area, they're looking everywhere, there's no sign of him, and it didn't make any sense to the people in this survey crew, especially the guy who was third in line, who was like, I literally saw him
Right?
a
Yeah.
minute ago. And there's no way he could have gotten away without me hearing or seeing some indication of where he was.
Even if he was running, you would hear.
Right.
He was gone. So after this huge investigation, they don't find any sign of him. And that's it. They're just like, yeah, he's gone. They did find 9 months later, they found his other boot near a swamp 900 yards away, but it didn't provide any more clarity into what happened to him. However, if you look at the pile of loose change and things that were in his pockets that were on the road, it indicates that at some point he may have been turned upside
down.
And if you think about the entirety of all of these strange stories where the idea of being someone hunting humans, just picture in your head Chris Tompkins walking along and something flipping him upside down, dumping the contents out, and then being gone in a matter of a minute where no one can see where they went. These 5 stories...
This was crazy. What do you think about that?
It was crazy. Like, how is possible in 1 minute somebody can, I assume from up, will just grab you, flip you, and nobody hear nothing, nobody... He didn't say nothing. Like, the first things you would say, you start to scream something.
That's what makes it so unexplainable. Like, my theory is it could be something like maybe that's on the ground that's just really quick, like, and just can't be heard, like, because it's stealth.
Okay,
maybe.
I agree with you.
Could be something that way, maybe. I don't know.
I agree, but
I have no idea.
If somebody grab you or in any way from up, down, side, you will scream.
Maybe they got, you don't know what they're using. If someone's grabbing you from up, maybe they got some sort of like bubble that it puts you in where even if you're screaming they can't hear you.
Like alien stuff, like.
Who knows? I'm not one of them. That's why we watch this. Maybe they'll tell us.
That's true. What do you think, guys? Like,
yeah, let us know. Because see, this series is better for us. This is more suited. Now we got questions. We got more to talk about. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Now we in here. Let us know what you guys think about this. Like, because now we're gonna watch another one because we got to see what's going on now. Maybe we can get some more clues,
like
insights. Because now we're in our bag for real. Because I'm into the G and she is the
Chef Rosanna.
And we have watched what is this called? 5 Strangest Disappearances in Forest.
Yeah.
The Missing 401. Part 1, the intro, and we'll be back with part 2. Peace.